December 11th, 1978, 3:42 in the morning, a diner off Linden Boulevard in Ozone Park, Queens. Jimmy Burke is sitting in a back booth, alone. Coffee in front of him, untouched. He hasn't slept. His eyes are doing that thing they do when the math is running. Not angry, not panicked, calculating. 6 days earlier, his crew pulled off the single largest cash robbery in American history. $5 million in cash and $875,000 in jewelry taken from the Lufthansa cargo terminal at John F. Kennedy International Airport. It was the score of a lifetime. The kind of job that was supposed to set everyone up forever. And now Jimmy Burke is sitting in a diner at 3 in the morning making a list. Not a list of things to buy, a list of people to kill. That's the version Goodfellas showed. Robert De Niro, cigarette in hand, cold eyes, watching his crew self-destruct. The movie makes it look like Jimmy turned on his people because they got sloppy, because they bought fur coats and pink Cadillacs and drew attention to themselves when they were supposed to lay low. And that's partially true, but it's maybe 10% of the real story, because the actual reason Jimmy Burke systematically eliminated almost every person connected to the Lufthansa heist had nothing to do with fur coats. It had to do with the structure of organized crime itself, with debt, with hierarchy, with a set of rules that made murder not just logical, but inevitable. This is the story Goodfellas never told. How the biggest heist in American history created a math problem that could only be solved with bullets, and how Jimmy Burke, the man everyone thought was driven by greed, was actually driven by something far more dangerous. Self-preservation inside a system designed to consume its own. To understand why Jimmy turned on his crew, you have to understand Jimmy Burke, not Robert De Niro. The real man. James Burke was born on July 5, 1931, in New York City. His childhood was a catalog of institutional violence. By the age of 2, his father was gone. His mother could not care for him. He was placed in foster care, where he was beaten regularly. He moved through multiple homes, and in nearly every one, the abuse continued. By the time he was 13, Burke was living on the streets. By 14, he had his first arrest. By the time he was 18, he had served time in juvenile detention and developed a reputation in South Brooklyn as someone who could move stolen goods faster than anyone in the borough. He wasn't Italian. That matters. In the world of La Cosa Nostra, being Irish meant you could never be made. You could never take the oath. You could never become an official member of a crime family. No matter how much money you earned, no matter how many people you killed, no matter how loyal you were. Jimmy Burke would spend his entire criminal career as an associate, an outsider operating inside the system, useful but never protected by its full weight. He operated under the Lucchese family, specifically under Paul Vario, the capo who controlled rackets across Queens and Long Island. In Goodfellas, Paul Sorvino plays him as Paulie Cicero. Quiet, paternal, controlled. The real Paul Vario was all of those things, but he was also something the movie barely touches. He was a businessman who kept meticulous mental accounts of who owed what to whom. And that's the key to everything that happened after Lufthansa. Burke's operation was centered at Robert's Lounge, a bar in South Ozone Park that served as the unofficial headquarters for a crew of hijackers, thieves, bookmakers, and enforcers. The crew was diverse. Irish, Italian, black, it didn't matter. If you could earn, you were in. Burke's specialty was airport cargo theft. JFK Airport was a gold mine in the 1960s and the 1970s. Millions of dollars in goods moved through its cargo terminals every week, and the security was almost laughably thin. Burke had contacts inside the airport, baggage handlers, cargo workers, security guards, all on his payroll, all feeding him information about which shipments were worth hitting. A typical hijacking netted between $50,000 and $500,000. Burke would plan the job, assemble the crew, execute, fence the goods, and distribute the shares. He ran it like a logistics company. Efficient, disciplined, profitable. But here's what the movie glosses over. Every dollar Burke earned, a percentage went up to Vario, to the Lucchese family. That's how the system works. You earn, you kick up, you stay alive. The money flows one direction, always up. And the Lufthansa job was not Burke's idea. The tip came from Louis Werner, an employee at the Lufthansa cargo terminal, who was drowning in gambling debts. Werner owed a bookmaker named Fran, who was connected to Martin Krugman, who brought the tip to Burke. Henry Hill, Burke's closest associate, was the one who connected the dots and brought it all together. The heist itself went down on December 11, 1978. A crew of roughly 10 men, armed and masked, entered the Lufthansa cargo building at JFK, subdued the employees, bypassed the alarm system using insider knowledge from Werner, and walked out with $5 million in unmarked American cash and close to $1 million in jewelry. It was clean, almost too clean, and that's where the problems started. In Goodfellas, the aftermath is played as comedy. Maury won't shut up about his money. Frankie Carbone buys a pink Cadillac. Tommy's girlfriend gets a fur coat. Henry Hill narrates it with a mix of amusement and dread, watching the crew implode in slow motion. But the real reason for the killings wasn't stupidity, it was structural. Here's what the movie doesn't explain. The $5 million in cash was supposed to be distributed according to a specific hierarchy. Burke's crew, the guys who actually walked into that building and pointed guns at people, they were promised shares. But before any of them got paid, the Lucchese family took its cut. Vario took his cut. And Burke had to cover his own debts and obligations. By the time the money was actually divided, the shares for the lower-level crew members were significantly less than what they'd been promised. Some guys who were told they'd get $200,000 were looking at maybe $40,000 or $50,000. Promised. And that's where it gets dangerous. Because in organized crime, an unpaid crew member isn't just disappointed. He's a liability. A guy who feels cheated is a guy who talks. A guy who talks is a guy who cooperates. A guy who cooperates brings down everyone above him. Jimmy Burke understood this better than anyone. He'd spent 30 years watching the system work. He knew that the FBI was already investigating the Lufthansa heist. He knew that every single person who had knowledge of the job was a potential witness. And he knew that in the mafia, the only way to guarantee someone's silence was permanent. According to Henry Hill's later testimony, Burke started calculating within days of the heist. Hill said Burke became quiet, withdrawn. He stopped socializing. He started asking questions about who had been talking, who had been spending, who had been seen where. Calculating. Jimmy started getting that look, Hill later told investigators. That look where his eyes go dead, and you know he's already made the decision. He was just working out the order. The first to go was Stax Edwards. Real name Parnell Stephen Edwards. He was a small-time associate who had been part of the Lufthansa crew. His job was to dispose of the van used in the heist. He didn't do it. The van was found by police abandoned, with fingerprints inside. Stax Edwards. On December 18, 1978, exactly 1 week after the heist, Tommy DeSimone and Angelo Seppe went to Stax's apartment in Queens. They knocked. He opened the door. Multiple gunshots. Stax died in his doorway. 1 week. In Goodfellas, Samuel L. Jackson plays Stax. He's shown sleeping through an alarm, getting high, failing to move the van. The movie makes his death feel almost inevitable, like a natural consequence of laziness. Inevitable. The reality is colder. Stacks was killed because he was a loose end. The van was a problem, but the real problem was that Stacks knew names and faces. With the FBI circling, that knowledge was a death sentence. Loose end. Martin Krugman was next, the bookmaker who had brought the Lufthansa tip to Burke in the first place. Krugman had been promised a finder's fee. According to multiple accounts, he wouldn't stop asking about it. He called Burke. He showed up at Robert's lounge. He pushed. According to Hill, Burke told him, "This guy is going to get us all killed. He won't shut up." On January 6, 1979, Krugman disappeared. His body was never found. In Goodfellas, Jerry Heller plays the character based on Krugman, named Maury. The movie shows Tommy shooting him in the back of the head in a car. The real circumstances remain unknown, but the outcome is the same. Krugman vanished from the earth. Vanished. Then came Fran, the bookmaker connected to Krugman. Then Richard Eaton, who had helped launder some of the Lufthansa money. Then Joe Manrie and Robert McMahon, two associates who had peripheral knowledge of the operation. Then Paolo Licastri, a Sicilian associate. One by one, over the course of months, each body a closed circuit, each murder a variable removed from the equation. And this is the part that Goodfellas captures in feeling, but never fully explains in logic. The movie shows De Niro's Jimmy becoming paranoid, suspicious, dangerous, but it frames it as personality, as if Jimmy was just a violent man who snapped under pressure. The truth is more systematic than that. Burke was not snapping. He was solving a problem. In the Mafia, when a major score draws federal attention, the leadership expects the crew chief to contain the situation. That means ensuring no one cooperates. If someone in your crew flips, it is not just that person who faces consequences. It is you, your capo, potentially your entire family. Burke was under pressure from above. Vario and the Lucchese hierarchy needed the Lufthansa investigation to go nowhere. And Burke knew that the only way to guarantee that was to make sure every potential witness was either completely loyal or completely dead. He chose dead. Because in his experience, loyalty was a variable, death was a constant. And there was another layer the movie barely touches. The jewelry, the $875,000 in stones and gold taken from Lufthansa, was supposed to be fenced through a network of dealers in Manhattan's Diamond District. But fencing that volume of stolen jewelry takes time, connections, and trust. Several of the crew members who were killed had direct knowledge of the fencing pipeline. They knew which dealers Burke used. They knew the names, the locations, the split. If any of them talked, it was not just the heist that unraveled. It was Burke's entire fencing operation. Years of built-up connections. Dealers who had been moving stolen goods for the Lucchese family for a decade. One cooperating witness with knowledge of the jewelry pipeline could bring down an entire shadow economy that had nothing to do with Lufthansa. Burke was not just cleaning up one job, he was protecting an entire infrastructure. There is a detail that mob historian Jerry Capisi documented that says everything about how Burke operated during this period. Burke would take his targets out to dinner before they disappeared. A nice meal, drinks, conversation. He'd look them in the eye, laugh at their jokes, ask about their families, and then they'd be dead within 48 hours. According to one associate who later cooperated, Jimmy could shake your hand goodbye and you would never know it was the last time. He had that ability. Cole does not even describe it. It was professional. By the spring of 1979, at least 6 people connected to the Lufthansa heist had been murdered. Several more had disappeared. the FBI investigation, which had started with promising leads, began hitting dead ends. Literally. The irony is that the one person Burke should have been most worried about was the one person he did not kill. Henry Hill. Hill was arrested on drug charges in 1980. Facing a long sentence and knowing that Burke had been eliminating anyone who could testify, Hill made the calculation that Burke had been making for years: survival math. He went to the FBI and agreed to cooperate. Hill's testimony brought down Burke, Vario, and dozens of other members of the Lucchese family's Queens operation. Burke was convicted of the murder of Richard Eaton and sentenced to 20 years to life. He never saw freedom again. According to Hill, when Burke found out he had flipped, he did not rage. He did not threaten. He just went quiet, because Burke understood he would have done the same thing. In the system they both operated in, the only loyalty that mattered was the loyalty that kept you alive. That's the part Goodfellas never fully explains. Jimmy Burke did not turn on his crew because they bought fur coats. He turned on them because the structure of organized crime demanded it. The heist created a chain of knowledge that led directly to the Lucchese family's leadership. Every living witness was a thread that, if pulled, could unravel everything. Burke was not a psychopath who enjoyed killing. He was a logician operating inside a system where the penalty for exposure was death. He killed his crew to protect himself. He killed his crew to protect Vario. He killed his crew because the system he had spent his entire life inside gave him exactly two options: eliminate the risk or become the risk. He chose to eliminate. James Burke died on April 13, 1996, at age 64 in the Wendy Correctional Facility in Alden, New York. Cancer. He had spent the last 16 years of his life behind bars. He never admitted to the Lufthansa heist. He never admitted to any of the murders that followed. His grave is at St. John's Cemetery in Middle Village, Queens. The same cemetery where John Gotti is buried, where Charles Luciano is buried, where dozens of men who lived and died by the same system are buried, row after quiet row. Robert's Lounge was demolished years ago. The Lufthansa cargo terminal was renovated. JFK Airport moved on. Queens moved on. The world moved on. But the math Burke did in that diner at 3 a.m. is the same math that every crew chief in organized crime history has done when a job goes sideways. Who knows what? Who talks? Who dies? That's not Hollywood. That's how the mafia actually works. If you found this story fascinating, hit subscribe. Mafia Talks drops a new documentary every week. Drop a comment and tell us, do you think Burke had any other option after Lufthansa? Or was the killing spree inevitable from the moment the money was stolen? At Mafia Talks, we do not just retell the legends, we uncover what really happened and why.